Chapter 26b. Colin began to move towards her too, and Mary went with him. They both felt their pulses beat faster. "It's Mother," Deacon said again when they met halfway. "I knowed that I wanted to see her, and I told her where the door was hid." Colin held out his hand with a sort of flushed royal shyness, but his eyes quite devoured her face. "Even when I was ill, I wanted to see you," he said. "You and Deacon in the secret garden, and I'd never wanted to see anyone or anything before." The sight of his uplifted face brought about a sudden change in her own. She flushed, and the corners of her mouth shook, and a mist seemed to sweep over her eyes. "Hey, dear lad," she broke out. "Oh, dear, dear lad," as if she had not known she were going to say it. She did not say Master Colin, but just dear lad. Quite suddenly. She might have said it to Deacon in the same way if she'd seen something in his face which had touched her. Colin quite liked it. "Are you surprised because I'm so well?" he asked. She put her hand on his shoulder and she smiled, the mist right out of her eyes. "Oh, aye, that I am," she said. "But thou art so like thy mother, thou made my heart jump." "Do you think," said Colin a little awkwardly, "that will make my father like me?" "Oh, aye, for sure, dear lad," she said. And she gave his shoulder a soft, quick pat. "He must come home. He must come home." "Susan Sowerby," said Ben Weatherstaff, getting close to her. "Look at the lad's legs, wilt you? They's like drumsticks with stockings on 'em 2 months ago. I heard folk tell me that they was bandy and knock-kneed both at the same time. Well, just look at 'em now." Susan Sowerby laughed, a comfortable laugh. "They're gonna be fine, strong lad's legs in a bit," she said. "Let him go on playing and working in the garden and eating hearty, drinking a plenty good old sweet milk, and there'll not be a finer pair in Yorkshire, thank God for it." And she put both hands on Mistress Mary's shoulders, and she looked at her little face in a quite motherly fashion. "Ah, thee too," she said. "Thou art grown near a beauty as our little Elizabeth Ellen. I'll warrant thou art like thy mother too. Our Martha told me, as Miss Medlock heard, she was a pretty woman. Thou'lt be like a blush rose when thou grows up, little lass. God bless thee." She did not mention that when Martha came home on her day out, she described the plain, sallow child that she had said that there was no confidence whatsoever in Miss Medlock. "It doesn't stand to reason that a pretty woman could be the mother of such a foul little lass," she had added obstinately. Mary had had not time to pay much attention to her changing face. She had only known that she looked different. She seemed to have a great deal more hair, and that it was growing very fast, but she remembered her pleasure in looking at the Mem Sahib in the past, and she was glad to hear that she might someday look like her. Susan Sowerby went round their garden with them and was told the whole story of it and shown every bush and tree which had come alive. Colin walked on one side of her and Mary on the other. Each of them kept looking up at her comfortable rosy face, secretly curious about that delightful feeling that she gave them, a sort of warm, supported feeling. It seemed as if she understood them, as Deacon understood his creatures. She stooped over the flowers and she talked about them as if they were children. Soot followed her, and once or twice he called at her and flew upon her shoulder as if it were Deacon's. And when they told her about the robin and the first flight of the young ones, she laughed a motherly little mellow laugh in her throat. "I suppose learning 'em to fly is like learning children to walk. But I'm feared I should be all a-worrit if mine had wings instead of legs," she said. It was because she seemed such a wonderful woman in her nice moorland cottage way that at last she was told about the magic. "Do you believe in magic?" asked Colin, after he had explained about the Indian fakirs. "I do hope that you do." "That I do, lad," she answered. "I never knowed it by that name, but what does the name matter? I warrant they call it a different name in France, and a different name in Germany. The same things as set the seeds swelling, and the sun shining, and made thee a well lad, and it's the good thing. It isn't like us poor fools as thinks it matters as us calls out our names. It's the big good thing. And it doesn't stop to worry, bless thee. It goes on thinking and making worlds by the millions. Worlds like us. Never stop thee believing in the big good thing. And knowing that the world's full of it. And call it whatever thou likes. Thou wert singing to it when I came into this garden." "I felt so joyful," said Colin, opening his beautiful, strange eyes at her. "Suddenly, I felt how different I was, how strong my arms and legs were, and how I could dig and stand. And I jumped up and I wanted to shout out something. I wanted just to shout to anything that would listen." The magic listened when they sung the doxology. It would have listened to anything that they'd sung. It was the joy that mattered. Lad, what name's to the joy maker?" And she gave his shoulder a quick soft pat again. She had packed a basket which held a regular feast this morning, and when the hungry hour came and Deacon brought it out from its hiding place, she sat down with them under their tree and watched them devour their food, laughing and quite gloating over their appetites. She was full of fun, and she made them laugh at all sorts of odd things. She told them stories in broad Yorkshire and taught them a few new words. She laughed as if she could not help it when they told her of the increasing difficulty there was in pretending that Colin was still a fretful invalid. "You see, we can't help laughing nearly all the time when we're together," explained Colin, "and it doesn't sound ill at all. We try to choke it back, but it will burst out, and that sound is even worse than ever." "There's one thing that comes into my mind so often," said Mary, "and I can scarcely ever hold it in when I think of it. I keep thinking, suppose Colin's face should get to look like a full moon. It isn't one like one yet, but it gets a tiny bit fatter every day. And suppose some morning it should look like one. Then what would we do?" "Oh, bless us all. I can see that thou has a good bit of play acting to do," said Susan Sowerby. "But thou won't have to keep it up much longer. Master Craven'll come home." "Do you think he will?" asked Colin. "Why?" Susan Sowerby chuckled softly. "Well, I suppose it'd break thy heart if he found out before thou told him in your own way," she said. "Thou's laid awake at nights planning it, I warrant." "I couldn't bear if anyone else told him," said Colin. "I think about it in different ways every day. I think now I just want to run into his room." "Well, that'd be a fine start," Susan Sowerby said. "I'd like to see his face, lad. I would at that. He must come back. That he must." One of the things they talked of was the visit they were going to make to her cottage. They had planned it all. They were to drive over the moor and lunch out of doors among the heather. They would see all 12 children and Deacon's garden, and they would not come back until they were tired. Susan Sowerby got up at last to return to the house, and Miss Medlock. It was time for Colin to be wheeled back also, but before he got into his chair, he stood quite close to Susan, and he fixed his eyes on her with a kind of bewildered affection. And he suddenly caught hold of the fold of her blue cloak, and he held it fast. You're just what I wanted," he said. "I wish you were my mother as well as Deacon's." And all at once Susan Sowerby bent down and drew him up with her warm arms, close against the bosom under the blue cloak, as if he had been Deacon's brother. A quick mist swept over her eyes. "Eh, dear lad," she said, "thy own mother's in this 'ere very garden, I do believe. She couldn't keep out of it. Thy father must come back to thee. He must."